House of Wisdom.
Aloha everyone, this is Truthiracy. I'm making another video about Danny Wilten, the Pied Piper, and basically I'm going to be exposing more of his bullshit. And basically this video will be debunking the blatant lies of Danny Wilten and how he made a video stating that the Orion Nebula is in fact the macrocosm that mirrors the microcosm of the Delta Nile.
It. Beyond that, there is no rotating back and forth that has to be done. So that's obviously a very mystical thing that's going on here. What's also something that's another misconception is that this is all NASA, and so it's NASA's doing, and that's not true, because you can go out to any amateur website that uses a high-resolution telescopes, and you get the same thing. And this is actually in another one of my videos. If you just go search for it, I actually have proved all this, that this is the same as what you find in amateur telescopes. But the idea that you can put this on top of this, and it doesn't have to be rotated clockwise or anti-clockwise or counterclockwise at all, is absolutely very mysterious.
Danny boy, okay, there's nothing mystical or mysterious about it whatsoever. And I'm going to explain what is in front of your face, since you obviously do not understand whatsoever. First of all, the Earth is ever changing from its birth to this very day and into the future. You see, the Earth is constantly changing and moving. The plate tectonics. What was once an ocean may someday be a desert. So the Delta Nile that we know of today, most likely, without question, looked completely different 5 or 10, 15, 25,000 years ago, let alone millions of years ago. Just as it will change in the future. And to insinuate that it is man-made or made by God or whatever to reflect the Orion Nebula or star system is absolutely absurd. The Nile River is considered to be one of the longest rivers in the world. It is not man-made. It was not created to reflect Orion whatsoever. So the Delta Nile River that pours into the ocean, it forms a delta. This is a natural occurring event, which is why it's called a river delta, because all rivers in the world that pour into oceans form this naturally occurring delta form. And when we look at the geological timeline of Earth, mankind has barely scratched the surface, so to speak. So our ancient ancestors, dating back, let's say, 5,000 years ago or so, were astrological observers. They were astronomers, basically. But they did not use telescopes. They used the natural eye. And when we look at a historical timeline of history, the first telescope did not even appear until 1608 from the Dutch Netherlands. So telescope astronomy did not even begin until the early 1600s, and Galileo was the one in 1609 who greatly improved on the Dutch design.
Something that's another misconception is that this is all NASA, and so it's NASA's doing, and that's not true, because you can go out to any amateur website that uses a high-resolution telescopes, and you get the same thing. And this is actually in another one of my videos. If you just go search for it, I actually have proved all this, that this is the same as what you find in amateur telescopes.
Danny boy, talking about misconceptions. You are the Pied Piper, my friend. You are absolutely wrong with every statement you just made. This image of the Orion Nebula is nowhere close to the image that you get from an amateur telescope. You are completely wrong 100%. Here is an actual photo of an amateur telescope of the Orion Nebula. You see all of the coloration and detail of the Orion Nebula in this picture and other pictures of the Orion Nebula that you see? These images are not direct pictures taken with one shot. These images are created through exposures of long periods of time. Not only that, they are taken by what is known as star imaging. In other words, they are taking these pictures with different color filters, RGB, red, green, and blue, to create these colorful images that we see. In fact, the colorful images of nebulas that we see use X-ray and infrared imaging.
Of course, getting good pictures of a nebula isn't just a matter of point and click. When the equipment is this complex, these enthusiasts aren't just taking pictures. Here, the word is imaging. And their favorite targets are the nebulas of permanent observatories. Inside the enclosure housing their big 20-inch telescope, accomplished astrophotographer Alan Smallbone attaches a special astro camera to the eyepiece. He's preparing to image the Orion Nebula.
It's a very challenging object to me because it has very light areas, it has very bright areas, it has very dark areas, and it's a very difficult item to photograph accurately.
The digital cameras used by today's astrophotographers emulate color vision in the human eye itself. There are 3 kinds of cone cells on the retina, each sensitive to either blue, green, or red light. That's why those colors are considered the primary colors of light. But the retina of an astro camera is a computer chip, sensitive only to black and white. So for color photos, it uses red, green, and blue filters, taking at least one shot with each one. It's often called the RGB technique and is standard for producing more natural color. In capturing the Orion Nebula, Smallbone takes time exposures lasting 5 minutes through each of the 3 filters. But nebulas are so dim that for the best photos, he often needs dozens of exposures, with times totaling as much as 14 hours. No one ever said this was easy.
Astroimaging can be very tedious because it's very time-consuming. It involves long periods of time where you're sitting waiting for the camera, and the mount is just tracking, and there's really nothing you can do except sit and wait.
Later, Smallbone stacks the raw images on his computer. There, the different combinations of red, blue, and green dots work just like a color TV to create every other hue in the spectrum. Hours after first opening the shutter, the Orion Nebula appears in its natural colors on the screen, as no human eye has the sensitivity to see it. The striking images of these and other nebulas demonstrate the essential reason astrophotography is indispensable when it comes to the nebulas.
The combination of a telescope and a camera actually allows you to see details and structures in the nebulae that you couldn't see with your own eye because they're so faint and diffuse.
Okay, so I already proved that the Earth is constantly changing and that a river delta is a natural occurring event. So the Nile Delta is something that is constantly changing, not to mention that it's naturally changing. So the Delta Nile 5,000 years ago or 5,000 years in the future is going to look completely different. Therefore, any significant landmarks cannot last forever. That alone proves your theory is completely wrong, because the delta is always changing. So therefore, how could it match the Orion Nebula? You're talking once again like you were about the little triangle in the all-seeing eye on the sun, which is just one split second of its geological time, of billions of trillions of images that could possibly be. You're doing the same exact thing here with the Delta Nile, saying it represents the macrocosm of the Orion Nebula. Which brings me to another factual point of logic, that what is a nebula? What do you think a nebula is? Is it something that is permanent and stationary? No, not even close. A nebula, or a nebula, is a cloud of dust particles and gases. And what does dust and gas do? Is it stationary? No, it's constantly swirling and moving and changing. Therefore, the nebula that we see today is nothing, nowhere close to being the same shape and form as it was 1,000 years ago, yesterday actually, or even 20,000 years ago, or 20,000 years in the future. It is constantly changing, therefore it's not stationary, therefore you cannot mark certain points and say that it will match something like the Delta Nile and say that those two things were created in uniform or to match one another, because they are both constantly changing and evolving.
Wisps of matter, at times coming together, at others flying apart. Filmy veils, billowing masses, some dark, some glowing in brilliant colors, many taking the shapes of things that are eerily familiar.
It's interesting when people look at nebulas, they sort of start seeing things in it.
It's interesting when people look at nebulas, they sort of start seeing things in it.
Nebulas have fantastic shapes, like clouds in the sky on a summer day. They often evoke imagery that hits very close to home. Images of flowers, images of insects, images of people.
It's interesting when people look at nebula, it's like a Rorschach test. They sort of start seeing things in it.
Although nebulas are labeled with numbers from astronomical catalogs, many also have names inspired by their locations or shapes. It's not difficult, for instance, to see why this is called the Butterfly Nebula, or this is known as the Horsehead Nebula. The list goes on.
The Orion Nebula, the Ghosthead Nebula, the Stingray Nebula, the Helix Nebula, the Cat's Eye Nebula, the North American Nebula, the Pelican Nebula.
The astonishing forms nebulas take make them the tourist attractions of the galaxy.
So I think I've said enough about the Orion Nebula, but I want to move on to one last thing before I end this video.
The center of the Nile Delta is right here. The area, what's really interesting about this is this area that's right here. If you take a look at the human nervous system, the three pyramids are located right where the medullary pyramids are located inside the body. So the medullary pyramids are located right here, exactly where the Great Pyramids are, which is the very top, just before you enter the higher brain area. So this area that you see right here is the pineal gland.
Danny, I really don't think that I have to even start to disassemble your ridiculous assumption that the Delta Nile resembles the human pineal gland. I mean, I don't even want to get into it. It's just so ridiculous, it's self-explanatory. Danny, good luck to you, my friend, but everything you're teaching is completely wrong. Peace, love, and wisdom. Truthiracy.
Truthiracy. House of Wisdom.